We live in a world where there's some amazing budget audio offerings on the market, and recently Moondrop have released what could be two more. What I've got in today's review and tomorrow's review is the Moondrop Joker headphones and the Moondrop Dawn Pro dongle DAC amplifier, etc. Potentially what we're talking about here is a pair of headphones and a dongle DAC for a total of 130 odd US dollars that, if it performs well, could be way better than that price tag suggests. But the big question, of course, is it? So we're going to jump in and find out now about the Moondrop Joker, and then tomorrow about the Dawn Pro. Before I dive into the review of the Moondrop Jokers here, I do want to say a huge thanks to Appos Audio for sending me the Joker and the Dawn Pro to check out. As always, I'll put links down below in the description where you can go through to Appos and say thank you to them by purchasing through that link, but it also has no bearing whatsoever on what I'm about to say about these products, as you're going to see. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and regular viewers will already be onto this, is that I'm playing around with some different microphones at the moment, so if you've got any particular feedback that you want to share with me about the audio in this episode, then please do let me know in the comments down below. But now let's dive in and look at the Moondrop Joker. As you can see, these are a pair of closed-back headphones. They come in at a price tag of 80 US dollars, making them very, very affordable. And what's going on inside the Jokers is a pair of 50mm dynamic drivers. That's one driver per cup, of course, but that's what's going on inside. Those drivers have an impedance of 68 ohms and 106 decibels per volt, which may initially sound very sensitive, but when you convert that to the regular decibels per milliwatt that most brands use, it drops all the way down to 94 decibels per milliwatt. So these aren't a particularly sensitive headphone, but at the same time, they don't need buckets and buckets of power. You'll get these to dangerous listening levels of 110 decibels with just 37 milliwatts. And that means if you've got an amplifier capable of putting about 100 milliwatts or more into a 60 to 70 ohm load, you've got way more than you need to drive these safely. A couple of other things from the marketing and the spec sheet of the Jokers is that they're using an asymmetric style housing. So you can see there that it's not a completely flat profile. They've got a slight sort of outward tilt to the shape of the housing. And that gets done to reduce any sort of reflections or internal resonance of the driver inside the cabinet, if you want to call it that. And something else that's interesting about these cups is they're actually made of brass, apparently. And you can feel it. They do feel like they're made of metal in terms of the coldness of them. They've got this black painted finish over the top, so you can't really see what's going on, and they've got the feel of the paint more than the feel of the metal to the hands, but they do feel cold, and they do, of course, therefore feel very hard. Now, none of that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just sharing the information on the marketing. And something else that's really interesting is that Moondrop have actually designed these to allow for them to age over time. They even provide a little piece of sandpaper in case you want to speed up that process. So I'm guessing that in theory, as you use these, as they get bumped, knocked, used, touched, handled, etc., that over time, some of the edges, some of the surfaces may start to wear away and show through some of the brass, and or just the painted finish itself will start to show signs of use. So that's the vision that Moondrop have for these, and it does make for a very interesting proposition, but it also makes for something else, and I say it makes for the overall design and build quality and finish of these does make for a little problem. I don't know if you've been able to tell that I've been holding these very carefully, but let me stop being careful now and you'll see what I mean about the build quality. They sound so cheap. They feel quite cheap too. The cups themselves, just this back part, actually feels really good, but everything else just feels cheap and plasticky. And I don't necessarily mind that when they are only an $80 headphone, but there's just something about the way these cups wobble around and make that noise that every time I pick them up, they just remind me how cheap they are. The headband feels cheap. It feels like a knockoff of an HD6 series from Sennheiser, and that's not a bad thing. They're a wonderful, comfortable headband. But at the same time, it feels very cheap. It feels like a cheap knockoff of Sennheiser, not a direct knockoff. Something else that feels quite cheap are the pads. They feel like it's a really thin protein leather being used on them. And you can also see through the large perforations on the outer edges and the inner edges through to the white foam underneath, which looks a bit tacky. It would have been good if the inside was black, I think. And now I'm aware that I'm being a bit nitpicky here, but at the same time, I think it's worth knowing what to expect. Sometimes in these videos, you look at these and you're like, oh, that looks nice. What I wanted you to come away with understanding is that they do feel like a cheap headphone. And that's not necessarily bad. As I said, they're an $80 headphone. If the money has gone into producing a good driver in a well-designed cup, etc., then it's totally fine. But do be prepared for the fact that the moment you pick these up, you're likely to be shocked at just how cheap they feel. I think they're going to be sturdy. They don't feel like they're going to be breaking easily or particularly flimsy. There's a good level of adjustment, so you've got some rotation here. You've obviously got the headband ratchet adjustment there. So everything there's good, it just feels cheap. Not breakable, not flimsy, but cheap. Now before I put these down, the other thing I'm going to mention is that on the bottom of each cup, we've got 3.5mm entries, and that means you can run these balanced should you want to. And they come with a decent cable, nothing special, but a decent cloth strap cable with a 3.5mm termination down here, and of course 3.5 for both of the cups. And that's pretty much all you're going to get for your money, which is totally fine. They're $80. And so from here, rather than labouring on about the build quality, you get the sense of where I'm going with it already. Let's now jump over and talk about their sound and see if things improve when we get there. Before I get to talking about the sound, I do just want to quickly remind you that if you're enjoying this content, if you've enjoyed other videos, or if you want to see the video tomorrow of the Moondrop Dawn Pro Dongle DAC headphone amplifier, then make sure you hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and of course hit the like button too. For now though, let's start talking about sound quality from the Dawn Pro, and I'd sum up their sound quality by saying that they do some things quite well, and other things not so much. And I think the biggest issue for me is that they've just got way too much energy at around about sort of the 2 to 3 kilohertz mark. What that means is that they can get way too forward in the upper mid-range sounds. And then on top of that, they've got a very sharp roll-off below about 100 hertz. And so the end result is a headphone that tilts well into the upper mid-range and treble, that doesn't have a great deal of foundation in its sound because of the lacking bass, and can just sound a little bit thin, a little bit forceful, and a little bit unrefined as a result. I think overall their sound isn't bad, but the way they're tuned, they're just a little bit peaky. The way the tuning's done, it's not smooth. The way it transitions from one frequency to the next, things happen quite dramatically, and it results in a sound that's often unbalanced. So on one track they might sound quite good, on the next track they can sound a bit out of control. On the other hand, one thing they are doing very well is that the staging is actually very, very good for closeback, particularly a budget closeback, of course. What I mean by that is they separate sounds very well, and they produce a nice, sharp, clean image. So things like the main instrumentalists and vocalists are very well positioned in space, very well focused, very clear exactly where that vocalist or instrumentalist is. Speaking of vocalists, the positioning of the sort of your main mid-range focus does tend to be fairly intimate, but not congested, not claustrophobic. And all in all, I actually think that their staging and imaging properties are much better than I'd expect for the price. And so I think overall, I'm not going to draw this one out too much because I think overall, these are a headphone that the tuning just lets down. From a technicality point of view, they've actually got a lot going for them. From a design point of view, I kind of like the concept behind the brass cups that are going to age in time. I also like the design of them being a compact cup, but being that asymmetrical design, therefore should be reducing any kind of internal resonances. But somewhere something's gone wrong in terms of the tuning. Maybe there's not enough damping in there, I'm not sure. But the end result is a headphone that has some really good technical strengths, but that's unfortunately undone by really uneven tuning. And in some ways, they actually remind me of the recently reviewed and much more expensive HEADPHONE Audivina. For me, the Audivina kind of just pulled off its funky tuning to a point that I quite enjoyed it, even though I was clear that it wasn't natural. Whereas I think in the case of the Jokers, they've just gone a bit too far with that. And I don't mean that they were deliberately trying to copy the Audivinas. They would have been being designed at about the same time, I'm guessing, so they probably didn't know about each other. But what I mean is that the wonkiness or the funkiness that the Audivinas just managed to keep okay goes a bit too far in the Jokers for me and just makes them uneven, unbalanced, and unfortunately unrefined. And so what that means for them, and the reason I'm drawing the parallel to the Audivinas, is that with the Audivinas, I found that my brain adjusted in time to them. With the Jokers, that's a lot harder. It's quite difficult to get to the point listening to the Jokers where you feel like it's actually starting to sound natural. The one place where you might experience that differently is they actually work quite well for strings, again like the Audivinas. Their tuning happens to work quite well for orchestral music, but do keep in mind the lack of bottom end, that fairly steep roll-off below 100 Hz. That means that they're not going to give you the body and the impact and the drama of big orchestral pieces. So for chamber music, or for more lightweight acoustic stuff, you may actually find the Jokers quite enjoyable, but across the board, they're just not balanced enough for me. And so to keep this one quite short and simple, I'm not going to go into lots of comparisons here. I just think you probably should save your money and buy something else. And what I mean by that is save up just a little bit more and get yourself something like a pair of, and I'm sorry to those that hate these headphones, but I would prefer a pair of Audio-Technica ATH-M50X over these. I'd also prefer a pair of the HEADPHONE and Drop collaboration, the HER7DX. Both of those, in my opinion, are actually better headphones. As I said, I know that the Audio-Technicas get laughed at by some people, but despite the fact that they're not a particularly natural or reference tuning, they're still clearly more balanced sounding than what you get from the Jokers. and then take that a step further again, the HER7DX is way better in my opinion. So I think if you're in the market for a budget pair of closed backs, just skip the Jokers altogether, save up some extra money and spend it on a different pair, particularly the HER7DX. Or of course you can go higher to something like the Harmonic Dynathena, which I reviewed recently, which I think is wonderful. But the key point is, skip these, save the $80 you'd spend on these, save it up and get something a bit better. And so I'm going to leave this one here for the review of the Moondrop Joker, but I do want to encourage you to make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already, because you're going to want to see my review of the Moondrop Dawn Pro. All I'm going to say for now is it's a bit different from what I've just said here today about the Joker. It's a different product, it's a different result, and I'm going to leave it there and hope that I see you tomorrow for the review of the Dawn Pro. For now though, I hope you've enjoyed this video, I hope it's been useful to you, and if it has been, please hit the like button. But for now, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.